Hi, everyone. On behalf of the New York Public Library, I want to thank you all for coming to our very first Library Con, which is in partnership with Penguin Random House. So thank you for putting this all together. My name is Allison Ellis, and I'm a supervising librarian of program and outreach here at SNFL. And I just want to remind you all that September is Library Card Sign-Up Month, and if you do not already have a library card, please sign up at any information desk throughout this building. I also want to let you guys know that we have a ton of programs up here coming up this fall, starting with our Banned Book Week event on September 27th, called Voices Unbound, an evening of literary defiance against censorship. And on October 16th, we'll be having an all-day program to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So hopefully we will see you in either of those programs or in this space again. And with that said, I'm going to pass it off to our friends at Penguin.
Hello, thank you for coming. I'm Kelly Coyle Crivelli from Penguin Random House. We are excited. We love hosting library cons. We used to do a lot more of them in person before COVID, and we are starting to do them again. And we're really happy to work with the New York Public Library and the SNFL branch. It's been a really fun time putting it together. We are fortunate enough at Penguin Random House to work with a lot of distribution partners. And within those partnerships, we work with really wonderful graphic novel publishers like DC Comics, Disney Publishing Worldwide, who has Marvel. We work with Kodansha, we work with Archie. So in your, and we work with IDW. So if you look in your giveaway swag bags, you'll see lots of different giveaways from these wonderful publishers that wanted you to have a little something to take away. And you'll also see from IDW a wonderful, beautiful edition of the March trilogy from Congressman John Lewis. So it's a beautiful slipcase edition that they wanted to send to the people that were in attendance tonight. So thank you for all for coming. And we have a wonderful lineup for you tonight, and we hope you have a great time. At the end of every panel, we'll try to take a couple minutes for questions if we have time. If not, we might have a couple minutes at the end, but we hope you just enjoy yourselves, and thank you again for coming out. So without further ado, let's introduce our keynote speaker, James Tynion. Hold on, I'm going to put on my new glasses I just bought across the street at the New York Public Library shop, which is my favorite shop in New York. James Tynion IV is an Eisner Award-winning New York Times bestselling writer and publisher of comic books. He is best known for co-creating hit horror comics like Something is Killing the Children, The Nice House on the Lake, and The Department of Truth. He is also the writer of young adult adventure series, like multiple GLAAD Media Award nominated Wind and the 2017 GLAAD Media Award winner The Woods. He spent 10 years writing various Batman titles at DC Comics, where he co-created exciting new characters like Punchline and Ghostmaker. He lives and works in Brooklyn, and we are happy to have him here tonight with Marie Javins, and she is an American comic book editor, comic book colorist, and travel writer, known for her long association with Marvel Comics. And as of 2020, she is the editor-in-chief of DC Comics. You will notice about graphic novel publishers, creators, and illustrators and writers, they all have worked together in the past or in some capacity. So it's a very close-knit community, and it makes the conversations that they have together way more fun. So Marie and James, thanks for starting us off tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm, like they said, I'm Marie Javins. I'm the editor-in-chief at DC Comics, and this is James Tynion, who is a writer extraordinaire and impresario of his own comic studio, as well as one of his early works was, in fact, Batman Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, James, I hear comics aren't just for kids anymore.
It is so wild that, because it's actually, like, I came of age at such a strange moment. It was like I started reading comics in, like, the late 90s, and, and then, like, and it was through superhero comics. That was my way in. But it was, like, by the time I was actually picking up comics in stores, there was this moment that there was a sense that there wouldn't be comics for children anymore. Like, it was like that it had gone away.
It was over. Like, everyone was like, oh, I thought comics were for kids. You're like, there aren't any.
Yeah. No, so it was like that was always a kind of joke line within the industry where it was just like, that there would always be like a newspaper article and all of that. But then it had become such a small niche audience that was really focused on superhero storytelling in a very limited lane, and it has been over the last 20 years that it's kind of like opened back up.
Yeah, well, and it wasn't that, I mean, limited, but also we really expanded the definition of what you could do.
Yeah.
Because when James came in, I was already working at Marvel as an adult then, but when James started reading comics, like that was the era of like Dark Knight Returns, Elektra Assassin, Daredevil Born Again, and that led to the mighty Vertigo, which took a lot of the superhero comics and gave them mature and adult treatments. And for the longest time, the audience was just aging with us and with the characters. And then something happened, right? So you like one of the things that people, our publicists asked us to talk about was how when we were in college, like what kind of comics were in the library. Well, the answer is none.
Yeah. No, and like even when, so I was in school in the, like I was in college around, but from 2006 to 2010, and I was at Sarah Lawrence College, and I remember I read through every volume of Doonesbury, the newspaper strip, because that was the only comic that was in like in the comic section of the store of the entire library, and I had to hunt that down because I couldn't find exactly where it was, and I just and it was like, all right, I'm gonna do my part, and I'm going to check out every single one of these books, and then I'm going to start requesting more books like through the system to try to get them from some of the other colleges, and it was like it created this real sense of that it was like living in a kind of like niche. And how was it like like working in the industry during that time? Like how much of especially because you were over at Marvel, and that was an interesting divide, because in like DC was better at collected editions. Like they had an entire like collected editions library, but you were working at Marvel, which was never quite good at collected editions.
I mean, there was a time when I was the collected editions editor. I mean, like DC had a whole department, and for a hot second, I was like, "Well, I label this film, and then I send it to the printer, and then we have a book, and that's the end of that." It was, it was a very different time, and I think that the whole impact of kids on comics really changed in the mid 2000s, right? So it was Bone at Scholastic, which had already come out as a comic in what we call the direct market. And some of you know what that is. Some of you just bought a company that is going into it. But the direct market is a comic store, right? So the companies, the publishers, through distributors, sell to comic stores, and the retailers sell to the customer, right? So like as a publisher, I'm not selling directly to a fan, right? That's no different than books. But librarians are now some of our biggest customers after the sort of impact of the middle grade market.
Yeah. No, and it's...
And you did some of that, right? You did some kids stuff?
Yeah. I did a series called Backstagers, which was a middle grade series, which I'm very, very fond of. It was basically, I was... a queer kid in my all-boys high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was a part of the stage crew on there, and so I wanted to do like an entire series about the magic of backstage, and like the kids going on actual adventures to try to get the set pieces they need to put up, and the actors are kind of the jocks in the book, like kind of bullying around the weird stage crew kids. And it's I really loved working on that, but also like just I was able to like a series that means a lot to me right now is one that I'm working on right now. We've 3 volumes are out so far. It's a series called Wind, which I actually started coming up with when I was 16 years old, and it was actually I like came up with that series reading like Bone was an incredibly huge influence on me, and it was when they started doing, and I would refer to the Scholastic editions as like the colorizations, like because the initial like run of it was in black and white, and so it's just like I would hunt down these like before it was acquired by Scholastic, it was just these. They were self-published trades that trade paperbacks that you had to like really hunt down because like the local comic shop wouldn't always carry them and the local bookstore wouldn't always carry them, and it's just like it's the and it was like I had such a
Yeah.
it was an interesting time.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So some of your earliest work was from life, is what you're saying. So
Yes.
what's interesting there is that comics have always, and by comics I really mean sequential visual storytelling, right? So it's like graphic novels, periodicals, everything, giant ones, little ones, So comics both inform and reflect culture, right? So what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. It's always a question of like, are we producing this story because it's just sort of in the ether, or did we invent this? And it's always a sort of a question, and your own personal experiences really affect sort of what you write and produce.
Absolutely, and I think that it was the interesting thing to me is the fact that like there was like moving from that kind of niche audience to a wider audience that was sort of happening in the early 2000s, which set the stage for the industry that I entered. It was like by more people like reading and absorbing this material, and a huge part of that also was like the manga coming into the scene, and all of a sudden there being a much wider breadth of types of storytelling. Because to sell a book in the direct market, even when you were doing something really, really mature and really, you kind of had to make it a little bit superhero-y to like to sell. To sell a copy, and suddenly there was all in a huge breadth of material and different ways to do it, and different places that you could see yourself in it, and really connect to the characters on the page and the types of stories that you could tell. And I remember, like, I always wanted to write, like, from a very, very young age, and I had all of these ideas that I wanted to get to, but it's, I didn't always feel myself reflected in the work, and I was able to, but it was the work I read through that was released by Vertigo, one of the imprints of DC Comics, that completely opened the doors of just like what comics could be for me. And it was like reading that at the exact same time as like I was reading the entire Vertigo library. I was reading all of like Sandman, like first and foremost for me, but also Swamp Thing and Hellblazer. And these are stories that actually, like for me, they also featured like gay characters and gay characters that weren't like being used as a punchline or the characters that had like 3 dimensions and all of that. But they were still these like deep, enriching worlds that I wanted to get lost in. They were and they didn't pull their punches. It was like you could tell a story that that you felt reflected in, but you were also like afraid for the character that you saw yourself in. When I write a lot of horror comics, so it's like I like putting my character. I love writing like middle grade stuff, but it's like I really, really love writing real messed up stuff as well. And but I still want to see myself in the real messed up stuff. And it's the breadth. It's the idea of that comics can be anything. And the thing that I've always loved about, like, Marie and I have worked together for
A while.
For a while, and but one of the things that I was most excited to work with Marie from, because you started at Marvel Epic, like, which was like pushing what Marvel was doing in terms of storytelling, and also like part of bringing Akira to the U.S. for the first time.
Yeah, and back then we colored the manga. We didn't know any better.
And it was like, but it was just that there always was this promise of the full breadth of what comics could be. And so what were the first like comics that you really like connected to? Yeah.
Well, I mean, Spider-Man when I was in college, right?
Yeah.
Or like as a little girl reading, Wonder Woman and Supergirl,
Yeah.
Nubia. There were like 2 issues or 4 issues of a comic with Nubia, which is Wonder Woman's sister. And, I went crazy for those. And when you're a little kid, I don't know, time goes differently. Those 4 issues felt like 4 years of
Yeah.
comics, like,
Yeah.
weirdly, But my first work at Marvel in Epic, this is creator owned, right? So Marvel and DC, Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, Batman, all of these characters are owned by their respective companies. But both of these companies also publish material that is owned exclusively by the talent creating it. So this is where Epic Comics, which was an imprint of Marvel at the time, comes in, and we were doing work by Mobius from Europe and with Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo, and a lot of other material. We phased out right about the time Vertigo started.
Yeah.
And Vertigo started with mature takes on Swamp Thing, Sandman, but then it evolved into a creator-owned imprint as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's
And that became Black Label, which most recently had Nice House on the Lake.
yeah. And honestly, that being a part of that, that tradition, like of these types of storytelling, the exact sorts of stories that I came into the industry hoping to tell, and getting, and I was an intern at Vertigo.
How did that? So you're at Sarah Lawrence.
I was at Sarah Lawrence.
Did they offer an internship at Vertigo, or were you like, I got to go get that?
I wanted, I definitely hunted it down. I didn't realize, because my senior year at Sarah Lawrence, I was not able to, they weren't offering internships that summer for some reason. But I ended up actually realizing that once I realized that you needed school credit, even though I had just graduated, I enrolled in one class,
That's smart.
so that I could continue to technically get credit, so that I could try to I knew I had to work in that building. I knew I had to be close to the making of these books. And I interviewed at Marvel as well, and all of that, and it was
They weren't doing that kind of comics back then, were they?
No.
So it was all DC at that point.
It was all DC,
Yeah.
and it was just but Vertigo was where I wanted to land. It was literally half of my bookshelf was Vertigo books. And
These are very popular in Europe, the Vertigo books,
Oh, yeah.
too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You've done well with that as
Oh,
well,
yeah.
right? Nice House won an award in France.
Yes, I think Nice House won the Grand Prix at the Angoulême Comics Festival. And for those of you who don't know, Nice House on the Lake is the story of a group of high school friends who were invited to this luxurious house on a beautiful lake, for a nice long weekend. And once they get there, they discover that the world is ending outside, and that the friend that invited them there is part of the reason the world is ending outside. And he has chosen that he wants his friends to survive, and he's put them in a little heaven for them to live forever. And then it's all of them dealing with that, and uncovering more of the mystery and how tied in that they've been. But it's been it's a very personal series to me. There's the central villain of the series is very much based on me, because there's nothing better than just okay, I'm gonna lay out all of my worst traits and turn it into a character, and then call that therapy in a way. But I don't know. It is there is this beautiful moment happening. In that I think that there's an interplay that's coming back, that I think, from that kind of late 90s, early 2000s moment where everything felt very disparate. And it was just there were no kids comics. There were there were adult comics that existed in very specific lanes, and you had to make excuses to get the kind of stories that you wanted. But now there is this huge breadth of different types of storytelling. And going back to even, what you were talking about of the just connecting to these stories, these worlds. That 4 issues felt like it was 4 years
Yeah.
of reading, and it's just like there's some kind of magic in the alchemy of words and pictures coming together into a new medium that is just so enriching, and you fall into these worlds, and then you want to live in these worlds. And I think you can see it with like I imagine some of the people in this room have been the kid sitting in the aisle, like pulling one book off the shelf after another and just like reading them right there on the ground. And the worlds that you like discover here, they can be any type of world, and they can be for any age. And I feel like it's such an exciting time as a creator, and it's also had to be very exciting, like seeing this full, like starting from comics can be anything, comics can be from anywhere, and then coming back to a world where that is,
Where it's literally true.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
literally true. And, middle grade opened up a lot of doors for everyone. But now those readers have aged, and we are having a lot of success with young adult graphic novels too.
Yeah.
And, from there, it's an easy step
Yeah.
into adult comics, right? Because, I mean, it's like, what even is the difference? Like
Yeah.
YA and adult are like pretty close.
Yeah.
It's just YA is oddly a little more mature. That
Yeah.
probably is counterintuitive, but there are many librarians here who will know what I am talking about, right? Because it's always about themes, right? It's not about punching.
Yeah.
No, I like a good punching comic as much as the next person, and sometimes you can kind of get a hybrid with everything in there.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone punches. Well, there's maybe a
There's
little punching in Nice
punching.
House.
Yeah. But it's more scary beats. And I will say, it's like as the audience ages up, you can get scarier with the scary beats, which I do appreciate.
Yeah, and we don't have a comics code anymore. That's not. We don't. I mean, we still are like reasonably restrained.
Yeah.
Like today, somebody showed me a picture of a 7-year-old punching a hole in a giant shark man, and I was like, that feels a little
But now
over the top.
Yeah. Well, and now you have to step in and be the comics code
Yeah, now
in
I'm
this
the
moment.
comic cop. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So anyway, you were an intern at Vertigo. I
Yes.
was an intern at Marvel.
Yeah.
A long time before you were an intern at Vertigo. And let's see. So after that, I went around the world for a
Yeah.
while, and then I was the editor-in-chief at a small Kuwaiti comic book company, as one does. And then I came back into mainstream comics and met James and a lot of other newer, younger creators. And it has just been amazing to watch. When I was back at Marvel, it was like we gave up on Epic and we just started doing superheroes for a long time. And now it's really awesome because you can do any type of comic. And I was just at ALA. I don't know if any of you went to ALA. And everyone kept coming to the booth and asking about our books, and it was really astonishing. One of the books is Blue Beetle. You'll hear about that later. And the other one, Nice House.
Yeah.
There's another series coming out. What's happening in the second series?
So Nice House by the Sea, and now like especially we tried to be coy for the single issues a little bit to. It's called Nice House by the Sea, and it looks as though it's entirely about a new house, an entirely new set of problems, and because if the first house is basically an alien who broke all of the rules, like he was supposed to choose the 10 most exceptional humans to sort of preserve them forever, and he just chose his 10 best friends. This is about a house that actually went after the most exceptional people, but it turns out that that's a bad way to like build a set of put a set of people all in one house together because they all hate each other. And they're supposed to live out eternity there, but it is also very much tied to the first series, and we sort of held back on that. But now, as it's coming out again, it's all tying together, and yeah, it's a lot of like interpersonal drama. It's I don't know, all a lot of like weird romances and like long lost relationships, and it's like it's the relationships you pine over for the rest of your life and the way that they kind of break you, especially if you're a very sad alien. And yeah, no, I'm very very proud of that book.
So it is interesting, right? These are periodicals. The long life is in the book, right?
Yeah.
So the periodicals, they're like graphic novels are made of comics, right?
Yeah.
So the periodical makes the graphic novel at DC. Some places have original graphic novels where they drop, 198 pages on you at once. But a lot of the ones we do have different windows. So first we sell them as like 22 pages a month, and then you put all those into a book, and that book lives forever on the stands. But the periodical, like a magazine, comes off the stands after a month, other than in the back issue bins, right? So I love periodicals too.
No.
But a lot of people only read the book, right? We
Yeah.
wait for the trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and it's there is something to this long form serialized storytelling that I do think that comics does particularly well, and it's why the periodical format has outlasted, other magazine periodicals, like very
Hardly any left.
hardly any
It's
left.
like the New Yorker.
Yeah, no, and
That's
it's
almost it.
and it's just like the
New York
actual-
Magazine. Why are all the magazines in New York?
I mean, I think it's they make some real good ones. I don't know. It is very very like that periodical format, like, and the serialization that came from it. Like really leaned into that kind of world building element, and it is one of those things that now you can still see it in the collected editions that come, like, that make their way into into libraries and stores all over the world. But it is there is the success of the multi-volume thing. The idea that, like, once you fall into this world, you can continue falling into the world. And that is something that I was really drawn to. I like the idea that you get to know these characters over many, many volumes, and really fall in love with them. One of my series, Something is Killing the Children. I think the next volume that'll be out in stores is the 8th volume. And it's just like, over the time, the series has evolved and changed so much, and the characters have grown up and changed, and they surprise me constantly. And as a writer, it is, it's incredibly, it's been incredibly gratifying seeing the audience grow and change with time as these characters grow and change with time, which is, and then being able to take a kind of ownership over, because like all of my, I came up in that whole in the world of serialized storytelling through superheroes, but being able to do it with a full breadth of content, and not just in a single lane, it feels good. I don't know.
We're still fans of Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles too.
I do still like Batman books quite a bit.
Yes, as do I.
Yeah.
Should we take some questions?
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? If not, I'll keep asking questions.
Yeah. There we go.
I could yell. Oh,
Yeah,
there we
we hear
go.
you.
There we go.
I'm actually in the nascent stage of writing a story, and you mentioned beats.
Yeah.
How much, when you're writing a story, how much do you think about story beats at the beginning of the process, or is that something that comes in later?
I mean, and this is like not helpful. There's no wrong way in. It is like, because really, you don't want to have an overly prescriptive process. You don't want it, like, you want to be able to lean into what you are most excited about while you're excited about it, to get the material down on the page. And the thing that you need is the ability to then, like, don't be precious about what goes on the page. You have to be able to throw half of it off the page. Early in like my writing career, I had a moment. It was actually during I was working on a creator-owned series called The Woods, and I had outlined it at 36 issues, and I had a commitment from the publisher Boom Studios that I was going to be able to get there and all of that. And I was writing the 8th issue, and then I realized while writing that issue that the central villain of the entire series needed to die in the 12th issue, and I had no idea what was going to happen to the entire story that I had outlined in detail after that. But it was so much more interesting for all of the characters for that to happen at that exact moment. And so I did it, not knowing where the road was going to take me after that. And I do think it's like you have to be able to throw out the map. But I think if you're in the nascent stage, if you're right at the beginning, it's make sure that you are taking in everything. You're at an input moment. Like you should absorb everything that you are fascinated with that you want to explore in this comic. You should let it into your brain, and you should let it percolate and all of that, and you should see how it changes what's on the page. Lean into your curiosities. Read a lot of nonfiction if you're writing fiction. All of that stuff, and just like see how it grows and adapts. But then once you're ready to sort of dig in and who's like emotionally at the heart of that story, you need to know what that character wants, and where they're going. And you can change where they're going, but you need to know what they want. And then you start throwing beats at them, and you can start laying beats out and all that stuff. But you always want to root a concept in character, and that fundamentally for me, that's how I do it.
I'm going to add something incredibly obvious, just in case you hadn't already given it thought. But also, there's other people here who haven't necessarily figured this out. But it's visual storytelling.
Yeah.
Right. So the most important thing is to think about how to describe the art, like what's going on the page visually, because ideally you're not going to have to make as many words, right? Because the art is going to tell the story, right? So that I don't know, is that a beat? If you're like draw this, draw that, like that's a beat. Yeah.
But
And famously, the famous Larry Hama's famous G.I. Joe silent issue tells the entire story with no words.
Yeah. No, it's such an incredible process. It's my favorite thing in the world, but it is
and it's such a unique skill.
Yes, but that kind of visual storytelling is all about pacing. And horror is my avenue in, but the thing that I always like thinking about is that horror is all about building up tension and releasing it. So it's all about and it's using the tools of the comic medium to do that. So my favorite tool to use for that is I like to play with density and then releasing the density, because it's the one way that you can control how quickly the reader moves through. But the denser the storytelling is, the more panels you fit on the page and all of that, the less can happen in each panel. So it has to be very simple storytelling. And you have to just and you have to basically be carried along by very simple images and short bursts of dialogue. But by playing with that and then releasing it in a big moment, you can take the wheel a little bit.
It's like a hybrid between motion storytelling and literature.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm a young adult librarian, and I'm just curious because you had mentioned before, the transition between teens going into adult comics, and so I have a bunch of different graphic novels and manga, and I have The Woods, and I also have Something is Killing the Children, and I had a young teen come in over the summer. She was a reluctant reader, needed something for summer reading, but she wanted to go to the graphic novel section. So I'm like, oh, sure, my favorite area.
Yeah.
And her mom kind of held back, and I said, here's the section, what are you interested in? She's like, I don't know, I kind of like horror. So, I kind of let her at it. And, she came back with all the volumes of Something is Killing the Children, and I kind of pick up, I purchase a bunch of different stuff. I know there's that kind of fine line. I'm obviously not going to purchase Sex Criminals. Don't tell Chip Zdarsky that, please, But I do. I have.
I'm so gonna tell him.
I have everything from Sandman, to some.
Yeah.
So she clearly was interested in it, and her mom didn't seem to care as long as she had something. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, younger teens, they love horror. They love horror comics, and you had even said that you were into horror. So,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, are you okay with younger
Absolutely.
teens reading
Well,
your more horror stories like that? I mean, because they're clearly they're flying off the shelves at my library, even horror manga too.
Yeah.
So it's definitely
It
an
is a
uptick
great
in the trends
moment.
right now.
Great moment for horror fans and comics.
Oh, yeah.
And even horror YA novels are now making a trend. So I mean, it doesn't like creep you out that teens
No,
or younger teens
It-
are
it makes
reading
me-
stuff like that.
I mean, I remember, I think it was like freshman or sophomore year of high school when I read Carrie for the first time. And it's just like, I think that there are always like ways in. And Something is Killing the Children in particular. It's one of those, like, it's got a very aggressive title. But it is like, it's a hero comic with a costumed hero at the center that, it plays with like real depth of emotion and all of that. But the storytelling in it is like, it is what I learned writing superhero comics and reading manga. So it is one of those things where it speaks in those languages. So it is a kind of more transitional work. I have some other books, like I do a series called World Tree. World Tree's a little more adult. Like, that one is like more aggressively adult, and it's like, for mature audiences. But this one, like Something is Killing the Children in particular, is like, it has that edge that I loved as that I particularly like writing towards, where it's like, it's a book that is going to be like okay in the hands of like, a younger teen, but it is something that they'll feel like pretty cool, that they're like grown up enough to be able to read. Because it's one of those things where it's like, obviously, one of the wonderful things about how comics have changed is that they're a bit more respected as a medium now, and all of that. But sometimes you want it to hit that little nerve where it's just like, I might get in a little bit of trouble for reading this. And it's like, because that was, I love the fact that I was like reading these Vertigo comics in the like in high school, and if the like priest running the study hall at my Jesuit high school like knew what was happening in that book, would not have been too happy with me. But I was that is like, you want to be able to play with that. But there are like Something is Killing the Children in particular. Like, please, like.
And
share.
there is a moment happening. Every publisher right now is launching a horror line and a horror anthology. I cannot guarantee the quality of all of them. The DC horror one is good. There's a lot of horror coming out, so
Yeah.
keep your eye on that.
I think we can squeeze in one more, and then we're going to turn over to our next group of speakers.
Hi. Big fan. Two questions. The first one is very basic. What is a beat? Just do you know what that is?
Just a story beat, like as in another, like, literally, it's. I mean, I guess there are a couple of ways to answer that. It's like laying out a page
It's like
of
an
a
outline,
comic,
like an outline.
Yeah,
right?
it's like it could be a scene. It's like a unit of story. Like, so it's, a beat on a page would be like, Erica Slaughter picks this up. That's like a beat on the page. But the beat in the outline would be, it's that whole scene where, Erica Slaughter is talking to so-and-so and learns this. It's like, it's a focused unit of story.
Erica learns that the water is a monster.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry. And then my second question for you. So I am from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I grew up across the street from Marquette University High School.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, so I really appreciated finding your stories, and I became engrossed with them because nobody ever thinks Wisconsin is interesting, and nobody especially talks about Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Do you feel that there is a ton of pressure to set your stories in more exciting spaces? or do you feel very much like intentional about making them set in Wisconsin?
So I think the nice thing is that Stephen King freed the entire horror medium of just setting all of the all he can do as many main stories as he wants, and that like has like set the groundwork. But I mean, like I love Wisconsin as like Milwaukee is just so much in my DNA. And it's like, and honestly, it's, my DNA comes from like two places. Like I was born in New York City. When I was 5 years old, my family moved to Milwaukee. I was there until I was 18, and then I came back out here. I've lived half in my life in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the other half here in this city. And it is just like I'm equal parts of me or both. And whenever I'm telling, especially coming of age stories, like it goes back to where I came of age. And Milwaukee is like inextricable to that. And it's a very fascinating city with a very fascinating history. And even just in terms of horror, from where you grew up and where I went to high school, that's like 15 blocks away from where all the Jeffrey Dahmer stuff happened. It is just and then Wisconsin's also the state of Ed Gein. Like Wisconsin's got a lot of weird qualities and a lot of interesting qualities. It's also where Happy Days is from. We've got the Bronze Fawns. Like, it is. We've got it all. So there's a lot of there's a lot to come from that, and it's just like I do feel very blessed that like the two. Fonts of inspiration are New York City, which I don't need to explain like why that gives me lots of inspiration. But Milwaukee is the more unique lens to me, and I intend to keep exploring it. Also, you should check out The Deviant if you like scarier things. Like when that comes out, that is definitely not for younger children, but that is me talking about
For the
growing
college
up.
librarians in the room.
For the college librarians in the room, that one's me dealing with, coming of age as a like queer person in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Our next panel, that was so fun. Thanks for that, James and Marie. That was so much fun. I feel like horror anywhere lately is scary. And I remember my first horror comic book was an Archie comic that they turned murderous. And I was shocked and I was appalled. I'm like, how are you making Archie comics scary? But they did. So horror comics are very scary. They call them graphic novels and they sound more fun in a horror, like it's a horror comic book, but they're not fun. They are still terrifying. So I will go over to my other seat in a second, but I just want to do a formal intro for our next panel. We have Jacoby, say your last name for me.
Salcedo.
Salcedo. That's what I was going to say, but then I second guessed myself. He's a comic book illustrator who is based in Olympia, Washington. He's the artist of the upcoming DC Comics YA graphic novel, This Land is Our Land, a Blue Beetle story. He is the co-creator of a YA graphic novel, Frontera, and artist on a mini-series, It's Only Teenage Wasteland, with writer Kurt Pyers. Jacoby has also been featured in multiple comic anthologies, such as DC Legion of Bloom, COVID Chronicles, and the Glad Media award-winning Young Men in Love. So we're excited to talk to Jacoby, who is an illustrator, and Alex Segura, who is an acclaimed award-winning writer of novels, comic books, short stories, and podcasts. He is the author of the noir novel Secret Identity, Star Wars Poe Dameron, Freefall, and the Pete Fernandez mystery series. He also has written crime novels, Dangerous Ends, Blackout, and Miami Midnight. He won the Anthony Award for Best Short Story 2 years in a row. Written comic books, including the superhero noir The Black Ghost, The Dusk, and The Awakened. And he's worked at Ani Press, Archie Comics, DC Comics, and he's from Miami, but he now lives in New York with his wife and children. So now I'm going to come over and ask you guys questions, but I wanted to give you a formal intro. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I love doing graphic novel panels because, especially when there's a writer and an illustrator together. And I feel like the audience, you might have some questions for them at the end, because I remember one time, the first time I heard that the illustrators and the writers don't usually even like they don't really even talk to each other until like far into it. And I thought the whole process is just so cool. We'll start off by maybe both talking about the writing, your process of what you do for a graphic novel or for a comic book and how that works. But I'll start the question this way, Alex, because this is a big question. How do you go from being a novelist to writing a comic book when your novel can be like as many words as you want? And then do you find as a novelist, do you get a lot of times the illustrator saying, this is not a novel, shorten your words?
Thankfully, that hasn't happened. Maybe they go to the editor and somehow that info gets to me in other ways. But what happened with me is I was working in comics. I was working in publishing. I was doing publicity at DC Comics. And one of the things that happens is when your passions and your hobbies become your job, you start to find other passions. So I was, literally at DC, you'd get a stack of comics, every comic that came out, and it was my job to kind of think about ways to promote it. And so I started reading mystery novels as like my escape. And then that became its own career, like making hobbies your careers. But so it was my point being, it's like, though it's always been a dual passion. And so my thought is when I have a story idea, how does it work? Do I want to play with others? Do I want to jam with an artist to create this visual story? Or is it something that I really want to exert more control over and have a very specific vision? And I can see myself working on it for a year or two in the case of a novel where I really want to manage every aspect of the story. The irony there is that my last two crime novels have been in the comic book industry and involved having comic book pages in them. So.
It's interesting. Yeah. And what about you?
Oh, for me, it's I have to talk to strangers on the internet. They're like, "Hey, do you want to draw this?" And I'm usually like, "Yeah, are you paying me?" "Yeah." "Oh, okay, I'm definitely more interested." And I mean, I work with the writer for the book "This Land Is Our Land," Julio Anta. We have been working together for like over 5 years now, and we just mesh so well. But I mean, like, we are now like one brain, and I think it's not I wouldn't say common for my experience to see someone, an artist and writer team, work that well together. And not to brag, but like
you have something special, yeah.
And I mean, and also it doesn't help that we look a lot alike too. So like we're literally
Really
like a
morphed
married
into one.
couple, And the process is just so fun, and like we text each other every day and just like, hey, what about this? And he's like, I was already thinking about that. So
I do think there's a lot to be said for having that moment, whether it's creator-owned, like something you come up with as a creator, or work for hire, where you're using a character from DC or Marvel or an established company to have that moment with the artist. I think the best projects were ones where I got to sit with the artist and say, what do you want to draw? What do you like to draw? And how can we bring your vision into this? So I'm not just telling you specifically what to say. I mean, a script is very formal, but you still want to have that conversation, I think.
yeah. I feel like the editor is just like third wheeling with us. Just like,
It's
oh,
really
this is
good when they're
awkward.
part of the process.
Yeah.
And you can kind of have that jam session.
Yeah, for sure.
You kind of just touched on it a little bit too. When you're writing for a graphic novel, for a comic book, when it's already a property that people are super familiar with, is that harder or easier than when it's something you're kind of bringing to life for the first time?
I think it's different. I think one thing I've learned over time is that I need to have some kind of obsession with that character. So if I'm writing a Spider-Verse story, I want to write from a place of passion or obsession. Like Miguel O'Hara was literally the moment of identification for me. Miguel O'Hara is the Spider-Man from the year 2099. But the moment of identification, I remember picking up that issue in middle school and being like, oh, he's Mexican Irish. And I'd never seen like a Latinx character as the hero. And so that's just one example, but you have to really find where your voice fits and what you can add. And also, since comics are so serialized and somebody else is going to pick up this toy, you don't want to break it so badly that the next person is going to spend their time retconning what you did. You want to add something to it, but also know that somebody else is going to drive the car after you.
And specifically for like the book that Julio and I are doing, it features Blue Beetle, but we're like set in this YA line for DC, so we're able just to go do whatever basically. It just has to include Jaime and the Blue Beetle, and
He just has to be in it.
Yeah, he just has to be in it, and we could do whatever, and we really did, and like you could see, like, and like Alex already touched on it, it's like you want to come into these stories and like, what are you going to add to this, and like how are you going to make it your own? And like Julio and I, like, we went to town.
Yeah, because I think if you're just evoking what you loved from your favorite stories, if you're just like a cover band, you're not really adding to it. So something like, I'm doing this series called The Question All Along the Watchtower for DC, which is, Renee Montoya as the Question goes to the Justice League Watchtower and has to investigate a crime. But the big thought we had is, how are we going to make this feel different? Like, how is it different from Gotham Central or all these other iconic Renee stories? And that's the challenge.
So here's a question, too, that I have as a person who doesn't live in the graphic novel comic book world, but really does like to pick up certain ones and gets really into them and involved. If you're talking to like a new fan, how do you explain where to start, or where they can feel comfortable beginning with a certain either character or just a genre? Do you think if someone's a horror, like say if someone's a horror novel reader, they like to read horror novels, and do you think that automatically that would translate to a graphic novel horror person, or do you think it's like what would you recommend? I guess I'd say
I could start on this one because I used to work at a comic shop, so I got this question
right.
a lot.
This is your
and
thing, yeah.
Yeah, like I was prepared for this.
Let's go through the algorithm.
For the horror, I usually just say, just read whatever James is writing. But like, yeah, like I do like, okay, like tell me like about your favorite character. Like, do you like Spider-Man? We can go over a couple runs, like, and like I think superhero comics specifically, they do kind of have a tendency to, like, a lot of readers are scared to jump in that because they're like, do I have to start Spider-Man all the way back to 1963? It's like, no, you don't have to. I mean, if you want to, sure, but like you don't have to. And there are like Marvel and DC, these books, they know about the scared, like that readers are scared
The
to jump in.
hesitant fan, yeah.
Yeah. So
it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and they do like number ones and nice jumping on points. And because, we want to bring readers on. We want people to read our books. And luckily, and it is way different than manga, where it's just like, start at 1,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, is readers are smart. Readers are going to figure out what they like and what they enjoy. And I remember my first issue of the X-Men was probably the worst jumping on point. It was in the middle of a storyline. Wolverine had no powers. Rogue was possessed by Miss Marvel. And even that sentence makes no sense to, like, unless you're really in the pocket and know comics. But as readers, we find our way and kind of navigate. So I think it's more just getting a sense of what kind of stories you like and what characters you're drawn to, and then letting the reader kind of figure it out from there.
Okay, so another question is, it's similar, but it's kind of two questions. So I'll ask you first, Jacoby, because your book. And I find that if a lot of people that don't know a lot about graphic novels, they don't realize that sometimes they do tell there are some serious themes, and they can tell a really serious story in maybe an easier way than a regular prose book can. So your story, it tackles bigger issues, and do you think that's a good way to get somebody to talk about? Do you think that's a good conversation? Is that why you like to do that, or and you also maybe talk about your book at the same time and go into it?
I'll give you a little short summary. So like the book is about Jaime Reyes. He lives in El Paso, and Jaime and his friends are like seeing a anti-immigrant sentiment being spread around town and by like this extreme far right group, and one of his Jaime's old friends actually moves back to El Paso, and they see that he's being groomed by this group. And while also dealing with that, Jaime gets this scarab attached to him that like basically gives him powers, and also the scarab tells him that like there's an alien invasion impending. So like Jaime's dealing with a lot in this book.
Yeah, the line says, I love it. It says he's been having surreal dreams that show him that the true threat El Paso faces isn't illegal aliens, but actual aliens known as the Reach. It's such a fun concept.
Yeah, no, we love it. A bit too timely.
Yeah, that's
cool
what I mean. It's such a good conversation starter.
And like, yes, these are heavy subjects, and the book is intended for younger readers. I mean, it's intended for everyone, but like it is intended for younger readers. But because it's heavy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's dark. Like throughout the book, you do see a sense of hope, and also, I mean, like there's huge superhero set pieces too. So yeah, like. It's this grounded story, but it also just happens to be a superhero story as well. And Yeah, so like I think the hope part is like what makes it or eases that kind of heavy subject.
Yeah, I always find that that's a great way to start a conversation with young adults, even adults. I remember reading one of, there was a DC graphic novel a long time ago, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was about growing up in Poland and being very poor and waiting on the lines for food and rations. And to me, it was a good way at the time for me to show my children like what that looked like, so that where the artwork would come in and be really important. So yeah, you can tackle like a bigger issue.
Yeah, and you don't have to answer the questions. I think a lot of it is you're giving a reader a chance to experience these things or see the world from a different perspective and come to their own conclusions, or at least ask those questions of themselves. And I think you're just starting the conversation. You don't have to definitively resolve everything.
So as far as the written part of that kind of book, do you think it's harder to tell something important or serious in shorter form? Or do you think that's easier? I don't want to use easier and harder, but you know what I'm saying? Is that less complex to tell it in a shorter amount of words?
I think, it's going to get, if you're using established characters or using like the superhero genre, you're going to make the story immediately more accessible. And it's a great way to have that conversation. I think it makes it not easier. It's just a different way of saying it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then the other question that kind of ties with what we were just talking about was the Marvel crime series that you're doing. That just started. We gave out, I think we may have given an ARC out of that, but that's a different way of telling like a thriller.
Right.
So it's kind of the same idea, just in a different genre. And what's that experience been like for you?
It's been great. The idea that, so Marvel Crime is an imprint where established crime writers come in and write a novel based on a street level Marvel superhero. So Lisa Jewell's novel, which stars Jessica Jones, just came out. I'm writing the Daredevil novel, which comes out next summer, fingers crossed. And S.A. Cosby, who's written great novels like Blacktop Wasteland, is writing Luke Cage, Power Man. And so the idea is that it's a quote-unquote shared universe, like something that whatever happens in Lisa's novel is somewhat reflected in my Daredevil novel, and it continues into Sean's book. But the idea is basically to bring in the thriller mystery vibe to these characters where that's really part of them anyway, but to focus on the genre stuff. So for Daredevil, obviously Daredevil has that duality of being a lawyer, but also this street level vigilante. So the shorthand I use to Marvel to pitch it is it's a John Grisham novel, except the lawyer puts on these red tights and punches the criminals after. So I love Daredevil. I didn't have to do a lot of research to get ready for the book, but I also had to approach it in a way that what makes this different from, reading Frank Miller or Ann Nesenti's Daredevil run. Like, what can I add to it and also make it feel less like part of the bigger Marvel universe and a very Daredevil specific story?
Fun. Yeah, it's fun. I think graphic novels are so much fun and comic books are so much fun because there's so many different layers to what you're getting. There's backstories, there's new stories. They take a storyline one way and then the next year it's completely different. So I think it's like a constantly evolving and fun.
It is funny how people approach the project though, because comic fans will say, well, where does it happen? Does it happen in the Bendis run or is it in the Brubaker run? And I have an answer to it because I'm a fan, but I'm also approaching it in a way that it can be accessible to someone that maybe knows Daredevil from She-Hulk, or they watch the Netflix show and they just have a general idea. So
I do think so. That was actually part of my next question. I feel like, or thing I was going to get to here. So I feel like if you read like a rom-com, for example, and you've liked the book, if you meet the author, you'll talk to them and you'll say, oh, this book was cute, whatever. But when you meet, I'm sure you both have experienced this at Comic-Cons before or events. When you meet a fan, I feel like in graphic novels and comic books, the fans take it very seriously. And so if you were to maybe take something away, they didn't like it, or, they're really, they get to know these characters and they seem very dedicated to me. And I'd like to hear about some of the backlash or some of the comments you've gotten because it interests me.
you write Star Wars, so
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure you get way worse.
I think I've done okay once the fans read the story. I think when they announced like the Poe Dameron book, it was right after was the announcement that Poe was part of the Spice Runners, which is a criminal organization, and they announced Freefall and said, "Oh, it's about Poe's time as a Spice Runner," which I think there was some people were like, "Oh no, Poe's a hero." But all I said was, wait and read the book, and you will then see what the story is. One of my favorite interactions ties into Secret Identity, which is a noir novel set in comics in the 70s. And you read the novel, which is about this queer Cuban American woman who creates this comic book character in secret because she can't get the gig of writing the comic. And you see interstitial comic book pages in the novel. So I've had fans actually email me and say, I've gone to my comic shop and I've asked about the legendary links and nobody has it anywhere. So, I don't want to say that I want to fool readers, but it's interesting when someone gets so immersed in a story that they really believe that it happened, which is great. So that's a positive interaction.
Yeah.
Luckily, I mean, the book hasn't came out yet, so like we don't know, but the fans are super cool. There's like a dedicated Blue Beetle like stands.
I
like,
liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, the fans are awesome. They send like memes of Blue. Like what? Like I've never had a meme. The only backlash I've ever seen on the book that I've ever was our book Frontera, and it was an Amazon review, and it was just there's two gay men kissing, boo, and I was like, what the hell?
Most of the time it comes from a place of passion. Like these fans are so
Yeah.
dedicated to these characters, and with the Star Wars stuff, definitely like, oh, this character's colored a little wrong from what they're described in the novel,
Yeah.
and you have to embrace that and just kind of understand that they love the world so much. So.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about the whole graphic novel world too is that it's such a team that it seems like to me. It's such a team that goes into every issue because there's an editor, there's a writer, there's an illustrator, there's a colorist, and I love that idea. Do you think that that makes the process easier or harder or just different?
I would say it's different. I mean, when I'm writing a novel, my editor is not going to see it until it's like fully baked. I mean, it'll still be a first draft and it'll get edited and tweaked, but it's my vision in that book. With comics, I think the closest example is like being in a band. Like you're playing music with somebody else and putting all the instruments together, you come up with something new. But I forget who said this, but the idea of you need to get the next person on the chain excited. I need to get the artist excited to draw what I wrote, and then the artist needs to get the colorist excited, and then eventually it'll get to the reader, and hopefully that energy just kind of channels through. Not to get too vibey about it, but
No, it is a vibe.
yeah.
No, like I said before, like the team aspect is honestly the fun part. Like, and especially like with working with Julio, it's just a lot of like we go into that idea together. Except for this book, actually, I wasn't initially like part of it.
Oh, really?
And yeah. And when he showed me the pitch that he was going to send to DC, and it, that's the story. I was like, that's awesome. They're not going to let you do that. And then he shows me the script. I was like, that's cool. No way you're going to do that. And then I'm drawing it, and I'm like, okay, I'm drawing it. And then now we're here talking about it. So
That's great.
shout out to DC for letting us do this book.
Oh, that's great. All right, DC, shout out to you. They deserve it. Yeah. No, it's great. And I think that, all right, so I have to ask because I'm sure people are thinking it, and I always wonder it. Graphic novels, comic books, it's a huge, massive world of different characters and different universes. Before, when you were younger and you were not sure what you were going to do when you got older, what was the comic book or graphic novel or character that drew you to this world that you're now in?
Oh, for me, it was Spider-Man. I remember going to an extra supermarket in Miami, and my grandfather bought me a digest of Spectacular Spider-Man magazine, a reprint, and it was this great Stan Lee Romita Green Goblin story. And I remember I pointed it out to my son recently because he's reading those epic collections, and I was like, "Oh, that's a really good story." And he was just kind of like, "Whatever, Dad," like But if I could go back in time and like tell my younger self that I was going to be writing stuff like Spider-Man, Adventures in the Spider-Verse, like this short story collection where basically every writer writes a different spider hero, but there's this big overarching story. And I got to come up with that overarching story and write the Miguel O'Hara chapter, or writing Spider Society for Marvel. I mean, I love DC, I love Batman and The Question, but Spider-Man was the one that pulled me in at first, yeah.
Alex is writing all the books that I want to draw. Like Daredevil was my boy. Like
Yeah.
I still love Daredevil, and like I would love to deal with that character in Star Wars.
Yeah.
I was raised on the prequel trilogy. Like shout out Episode 3, and like those are just stories that I'm just like I don't know what I'll do with them, but I want to draw them.
Yeah.
I just want to draw them.
That's
So.
fun. Oh, I love that. Forgot what I was just going to say. I get so involved with what you're saying. I forget I'm supposed to be asking questions here. But yeah, I love that. I love the idea that you're like a fan and then you're working with the characters. I think that's so fun.
There was a moment when I was working on a Spider Society script and my son came up behind me and he read what I was typing and he was like, Ghost Spider, that's like the character Ghost Spider. And I was like, I'm writing this for them. And it was really cool because it was like the two dots were connecting in his mind and it was really a neat moment because he's a fan. He loves Spider-Man too. And it's obviously my fault that he loves Spider-Man, but it's good that he actually likes it. Yeah.
It's genetic.
Yeah.
And then last thing, and then we'll take a question. I just want to say as a in our department, we work with librarians a lot, and we work with book clubs a lot. And I think for the two books, and I think, I know what I was going to say. I think the Spider-Verse, there's an arc, so that's exciting for the audience to take that with them. But because I think that book and I think your book, I think they are perfect for book clubs. So don't underestimate the importance of coming up with good discussion questions for your books when you're thinking about book clubs in the future, especially a book that's going to be talking about such a big topic. I think it's a great time and a great way to embrace book clubs for adults and kids. So, all right, why don't we take a question from the audience? Anyone? Do you? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you do the illustrating? Do you also do the coloring? Because I remember first learning about the colorists and being very intrigued by that.
So for this book specifically, I did not do the colors. That was Francesco Segala. Amazing colors, and for those that were able to flip through it or see preview pages of the book, like you'll be like, damn, that's amazing. But for the book Frontera that I did, that one I did the colors on, I think to me, colors are super important in comics. Like they are one of my favorite parts of the job. I just wish I had more time to do my own because I think that's where I get to see the final thing and be like, this is how I pictured it in my head.
Yeah.
But no, Francesco like killed it and nailed every page. Like
That's great. See, it really is it really is teamwork.
yeah.
I have one here.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My question is, who are some of the graphic novelists or artists that have influenced your art style and work? And also for writing, what are some of the writers that have influenced your work?
I guess I'll just list my three most iconic runs. I was a big X-Men kid growing up. I mentioned that very complicated, convoluted X-Men issue, but I love that initial Chris Claremont run because it features three-dimensional, complicated characters. I could always relate to the X-Men because I was never an Avengers kid. I was never the cool kid in school. I was like the freak, the nerdy kid that went to the library every day after school and just kind of stayed there. So I loved reading his really complex stories about outcasts and the kind of greater metaphor. And also as a Cuban American kid from Miami, I really got into a little bit later, in college, into Love and Rockets by Los Bros Hernandez, particularly Jaime's Locas stories, because there was no comic book like that when it was coming out. Just about these punk rock kids, and you actually watch them grow up in real time. You read about Maggie and Hopi as these two girls in love as college kids, and now you can read about them in their 40s and 50s. And I think it's just such an epic story. And then I'll stop after this, but Grant Morrison's Animal Man run with Chaz Trog, the way they wove this meta narrative and just pushed the envelope and danced between DC continuity. I reread it every year just to be reminded. And I think as authors, we have to read the stuff that makes us passionate because it reminds you why you do the stuff you do. And it always energizes me to read those.
No, I will say I've said before, Daredevil's my boy, and like my two favorite artists did like epic runs on them. One being John Romita Jr., who worked with Ann Nocenti.
I just reread that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. Such amazing art, and the inker on that. There's another job into the comic making part. Al Williamson was like, they just meshed so well, and the other artist for Daredevil who did a run with Mark Waid was Chris Somney, and just such a clean and fun style, and it worked so much for the book. But I think the artist that I look at and just get like super energized and just like motivated is this artist Tanchi Zonjic, who did a lot of Lobster Johnson, which is like part of the Hellboy universe, and like just such smart use of like panels
And that Black Hammer miniseries, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Skeleton, Skulldigger and Skeleton Boy. Yeah. Yeah. Like I have that book on my table, like whenever I'm drawing, because like it's just unique takes and this goes back to the coloring thing. Like he colors all his own work, and like I'm just so inspired every time and jealous. So like, it's a little bit of spite. Yeah. And yeah, like those are the top three for me.
Do we have time for one more question?
We could do one.
Anybody else?
I wanted to know later, will you be around for autographs? And are we allowed to get autographs from the guys?
Yeah, I was telling Kelly in the green room that I went through my galleys. Like I was like, I'll bring my galley that's coming out in the fall, and it's actually like 5 books. So anyone that wants to come up to me to get a galley of like Alter Ego or Dark Space or stories from the Spider-Verse, just find me later.
I don't know if I have anything to sign, but I will sign whatever you bring me.
You could sign the program. I know the
Okay,
art wasn't
Yeah.
ready yet. Well, we'll move on to the next program, but I just want to say I just love that you're both coming at the graphic novel, the comic book from different angles, because I do think it is so unbelievably inspiring, the teamwork and all the work that goes into like one panel of a comic book and graphic novel, and I love it. So every time we do these programs, I'm always very taken aback by how much passion goes into every single graphic novel, and I love it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Miriam Tulio from Penguin Random House's Library Marketing Team, and I would like to welcome to the stage 2 esteemed colleagues. TJ Ferentini began working in manga publishing in 2016 as an editorial intern for Kodansha Comics. Now a senior editor, they have worked on series such as Attack on Titan and many of Kodansha's BL and LGBTQ+ series, including Boys, Run the Riot, and Is Love the Answer. Joining TJ is Tomoko Nagano, who began her publishing career at Sesame Street, where she edited a variety of children's books and educator guides. She is now a full-time in-house editor at Kodansha Comics, and she has worked on a variety of series, including Shaman King and I Can't Say No to the Lonely Girl, as well as Windbreaker. Please welcome TJ Ferentini and Tomoko Nagano.
I never get tired of hearing our titles introduced. I'm like, oh, I love that series. I'm like, right, I worked on it.
There's nothing more satisfying than seeing something you worked on. As some of the creators who spoke before us, you're looking at those sketches, thumbnails, and to see it become a real book, never gets old. Yes, so a little bit different. We are editors. We bring manga to English language readers. So that's what we're going to have a conversation about. And what excites me so much, in addition to speaking in an event with such other esteemed industry creators and editors, wow. And I love to see it. Manga and American comics come together, and we coexist. We inspire each other, and that's what this event, so far, what I'm hearing and what you'll hear, you might hear from us is, yeah, it's going to prove that.
So quick PSA before I forget. Right after this event, the table right outside this room, we actually have, in addition to the samplers that are in your tote bags this evening, we also have a selection of art cards and posters too. So if you want to do a little redecorating in, your office cubicle or your room at home, and need some fun, cool manga images to put up on the wall, definitely don't miss out on that. But yeah, it's always, I always love having the opportunity to get to hear from folks on the comic side of things, because we're always like in our little manga bubble, and that process is very much different, rather than working with the artist the way that comic editors do, kind of analyzing like the panels themselves. Oh, do you really want to draw it this way? Do you want to present it this way? We're looking at material that is already kind of published in Japan and thinking about what would an English language audience want to read. Is there an audience for here? Are people really asking about these kinds of stories? So in addition to editing the actual manga that we do end up acquiring, a large part of our job is also reading titles and considering like, would this work well here?
Yes, and when Marie mentioned Akira, bringing Akira over from, so it's still around, and it evolved. Back in the days, it was Marie mentioned it being colored. I think it was also flopped and like cut up into those floppies. But now manga readers are much savvier. So it's right to left, and it's original, and it's endures to this day to the original readers and new readers.
Yeah, and Akira is like a really great example because it had that entry point. And then, several years ago, we were thinking about, okay, how can we kind of present it in the original manga format? And now it's available as, I lost count, but I think at the time we called it the 35th anniversary box?
Is it that big box?
The very big 20-pound box. And that was actually Kodansha's first box set that we've ever done, and now box sets and proprietary editions are something that's like very normalized, and we announce all the time. But at the first time, that was like a very laborious project, because like one aspect of publishing Akira, not just only editing the English language edition, but they were told like, don't letter the sound effects. So all the backs of the books, we had a sound effect glossary. We were also told to match the Japanese paper as exactly. So I remember sitting in the office with like a swatch book of paper samples, comparing it and being like, is this shade the right color? Is the paper the same weight? So that's also kind of, sometimes really interesting conversations that come up depending on the series that we're working on. In addition to Akira, Kodansha is also very well known for Attack on Titan, but also Sailor Moon. That's another one where a lot of considerations, and Carrie needs to go into the approvals process to make sure.
It's such a beloved, we talked about fandom. You don't mess with fandom. They've got opinions, and we want to do them right. Yes. No way. All right.
But yeah, Tomoko and I, though, we've both worked on some titles that are very, like near and dear and close to our hearts. And for myself personally, I'm like a queer, non-binary person, and when I entered the industry, I knew that for me personally, I wanted that to not only be my identity as a person, but also to take that into consideration with the kind of work that I do and the kind of stories that I advocate for. So Miriam mentioned that earlier, but two series in particular that are near and dear to me are Boys Run the Riot and Is Love the Answer. Boys Run the Riot in particular is very special because it was created by a transgender manga creator. It's about a transgender high school student who wants to start his own fashion brand. So anyone, who is looking to discover themselves through fashion can, wear clothes that they're comfortable in. And when I first read that series, I'm like, we need to do this. Not only do we need to do it, but we need to do it right. So I also advocated for us having a all trans localization team work on that series. So from the translator to the letterer, to myself as the editor. So that was a really kind of special title. But I know that you've also worked on some titles as well that, where a lot of care has gone into the series themselves, right?
Yes, and manga in general is very near and dear to my heart. I come from a family of immigrants. My family and I immigrated from Japan when I was very young, during a time when manga was nowhere, let English language, and so they were sent to me. My grandmother sent them to me. They were bought in on occasional visits, and they were not only reflective of my personal experiences. They were my connection to my homeland and my heritage. I actually brought some show and tell.
I was gonna say, now I need to know, like, what was your manga
No,
origin
there's-
story? What was
there's,
the first one that you read?
Well, first, this is one of them. This is Astro Boy, a classic, and it's one that Astro Boy is available through Dark Horse, but it was Osamu Tezuka is godfather of manga. It was generational. This is what my dad read, so he kind of passed that love down onto me. Another one, which is also timely, is you may have heard Unico. It just came out from Scholastic. It's meant for kids. Also, Osamu Tezuka adaptation. But for me, this was my Unico when I was the target age of Unico right now in Japanese. So it thrills me to see Unico, just this mass appeal to introducing Tezuka works, and to see it. I never would have imagined that. So it's really special, and just working in manga, it's also the reason I retained the language. I was never educated in Japan, so anyone like librarians, teachers, I mean, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. Graphic novels, visual storytelling is reading. It's literacy, and a lot of the concepts of literacy are in graphic novels. And if it weren't for those manga, I wouldn't be reading I wouldn't have the reading level of Japanese as I do now as an adult. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know Japanese now, but certainly when I started reading manga, I was in elementary school. I didn't know any back then, and I feel like the localization and like the licensing process is very different now, because a lot of it is conversations between publishers and fans taking recommendations, like what would you like to see here. But I feel like back in the day it was very much like you got what you got. There certainly wasn't any simulpub or anything. And for me, the first few series that I read were. The first manga I ever read was Cardcaptor Sakura, and I recognized it because I'd seen the anime, and I remember going into a bookstore and being like, wait, there's a book of this? And then when I found out that there was more manga, the next couple series I read after that were Inuyasha, Gravitation, and Chobits, all three series that I should not have been reading when I was 10. But now it's like really exciting, because a lot of publishers are like, is there something you want to hear us see? Like, send us an email, let us know. So it's really great when we have the opportunity, for example, to do like these like anniversary editions, like Shaman King, which is a classic, and we now get to republish it for an all new, for not only fans who like originally read it, but like a whole new era of fans. Or for example, like Boys Run the Riot. Like, I've read that now as an adult, but every single time I reread that series, I think like, wow, this would have completely changed my life if I had read this when I was younger.
Speaking of Shaman King, it's a classic IP. It's been through a lot of reiterations in anime, and TJ actually Here, you can hold it up.
yeah, sure.
TJ is a genius at formulating and conceptualizing special. Yeah, that's a 3-in-1 omnibus that I had the great fortune to edit. I bring up Shaman King because working on this is what made me explore American comics. This I held it backwards. This
It's read right to left. You're reading the wrong way.
It's like this particular mangaka is very influenced by American comic artists. One of them being notably Mike Mignola, Hellboy. I wish I read Hellboy before I started working on this because I'm seeing all sorts of influences. There was also an arc, a side story with inspired by Ghost Rider, which is a Marvel character. I never heard of Ghost Rider, so I had a hard time finding Ghost Rider. I found out I eventually located a big omnibus of the original Ghost Rider. The library does not let you check these out. I had to go to the Steven Schwartzman reading room, and I'm in this traditional reading room where with those bank teller lamps, and I'm sure people were there reading, doing scholarly research. No, I'm reading Ghost Rider. So lots of influences in both. So I really credit working on this for having an appreciation. There's a stereotype that manga people, you're team manga, team superheroes, and it's I see that changing.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I'm personally just really excited about some of the new series that we have coming out, this fall and within like the next year or so. Are there any titles that you're particularly like really? I have my list, but
You start.
Oh gosh. Okay.
I want you started. Yes, I do. But
Yeah. So I was telling some of my colleagues the other day that I'm very much like in my fantasy era right now. I'm like really into fantasy manga. So two of my favorite titles right now are Witch Hat Atelier and the Spellbook Library. And if you haven't read Witch Hat Atelier, it is the most diverse manga that I personally like have ever read. It's set in a fantasy world, and it's about a young girl who wants to become a witch, but she's told that witches are born, not made. You can't be a witch if you are not born one. And then she discovers that the secret to becoming a witch is that through drawing, like you actually draw seals, and that's how you can create magic. So if you draw and you study really hard, anyone has the capability to become a witch. So not only does it have that beautiful lesson and the lesson about how art is literally magic, but there is just such a wide range of diversity in the characters and their races and their representation. And also like in accessibility, like I have never seen a series that has like such a variety in like able-bodied or non-able-bodied characters, such as like Witch Hat Atelier, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And if you haven't read it already, I highly recommend it. And if you're a librarian, just definitely keep your finger on that pulse, because an anime is coming out next year, so folks are probably going to be really asking for it if they're not already asking for it already. And we did mention before about how with manga, typically, the book is done in Japan. When we license and acquire a title, that series is already complete in Japanese. But Kodansha is also publishing a series of several, there's 3 series right now that we publish exclusively through our reader portal. So if you go to kodansha.us and you create an account, 3 series that we publish, Bloodblade, Reanima, and the Spellbook Library, they're actually made for an English language audience, and they're coming out in English first. So that's really fascinating because the Japanese version doesn't exist. The authors are drawing these series completely for us. When we see the artwork for our edition, our edition is coming up before the Japanese release. So those series are really fun because, we have the opportunity to have, or at least what I imagine is the closest, working relationship that like comic editors would have with an artist. So for example, I edit the Spellbook library, and sometimes the author's like, can you help me come up with a name for this character? And that was actually fun because a lot of the characters are inspired by, it's set in a fantasy world, and the world is not necessarily a reflection of this, but some of the characters' names are derived from like Turkish. So I knew previously that a character had like a Turkish-inspired name, so I was like, okay, if you want to go with the same kind of vein, these are some recommendations for this character that I have. And they were like, oh, that's great, let's go with that. So that I was like, whoa, I helped name a character in a manga, which is definitely something that like doesn't normally happen, when we go through our normal kind of localization process. And also just very quickly about that series, it is set in a world where librarians are not only librarians who help people find books, but they also capture monsters, and then they seal these monsters in spell books, which are then found in the Spellbook library. But as you learn more and more about this universe, you start to wonder, are the monsters really the bad guys, or is it the library? So if you're into fantasy, if you like a series like Cardcaptor Sakura, which had Atelier, or a little bit of grittiness that you normally see in like shonen manga, this series is gonna be right up your alley. And who we're all here because we love libraries. So what's better than regular libraries? A magical library.
With spell books.
Spell books.
Yes, and TJ has the great fortune of actually having this interaction with the creators. That's not something manga editors usually have. We have very little interaction with the original creators. You had some kind of interaction with when you worked on Boys Run the Riot, right? Maybe not direct, but you were able to have some back and forth.
Yeah, so with Boys Run the Riot, that's another, and thank you for mentioning that, that's another interesting example because, so typically we tend to adapt the Japanese covers as closely as possible, but for Boys Run the Riot, so, like I said, it's about a transgender high school student. We really wanted, readers to pick that up and know that from the get-go, so that, if you're a young queer reader, you pick that up, you could see that and literally see yourself reflected in the cover. And the first cover of the original Japanese volume had the main character, he's wearing his school uniform, so unfortunately it's a blazer with like a skirt, and he likes to do graffiti art, so he's holding a can of spray paint, and the background is just kind of like a plain white. So looking at this, we were like, are people going to know it's about fashion? He's wearing a school uniform, he's carrying a can of paint. Are they going to think it's a graffiti manga? But the author did a beautiful color illustration for the first chapter when it was serialized in Japan. And it was this like 3-spit image, and you see the main character, like half of him is wearing his like, regular street clothes, and then half of him is wearing like his school uniform. And you also see like his friend, like the same kind of split image. And we were like, that is it. Is there a way that, we can make this our volume 1 cover and then get all new illustrations drawn in this similar vein for volumes 2 through 4? And we were able to do it, and the author was like completely on board. So not only like was that something very cool and special we got to do for our edition, but they also sent over like their sketches. Actually, before that, they were like, can you sketch what you want the author to draw? So I, employed my manga skills and drew very elaborate stick figures, with
that's art.
Yeah, with like Japanese, like, labeling, like, oh, maybe this could be this and this could be that. So I did not include my stick figure drawings as a bonus page in the back of the book, but we did include the author's sketches, and that was just, something incredibly special. Because like you said, Tomoko, like you don't really get to see that,
No, that's exciting. And then I'm glad you mentioned both Spellbook Library and Witch Hat Atelier, because one of the upcoming series I'm really excited about that I'm working on is called I Want to Love You Till Your Dying Day. It's a Yuri series, which means it's a romance story between 2 girls or 2 women, and it takes place in a school. It's an an orphanage where they train in magic, but the magic they are training in is for warfare. So it's very dark. It's a dark fantasy, and the two main characters become closer, and so I love it because it's very rare. I hear that there's a demand to see queer representation in fantasy. And so this was something that filled that need. And it is very dark, so it's thought provoking about exploiting children, human lives, the concept of what purpose does war serve. I'm. This is something that's coming in spring. I want to love you till your dying day, and while I'm working on it, I have also kind of looked to other books, such as the YA book. There's one in particular called The School for Soulless Girls, which it's in a young adult book, which I kind of read to kind of help me get into the mindset. And one thing I want to say is the way that I can consult all these sources of inspiration, I have to credit the library. We often talked about, I find my favorite books at the library. It's a resource, but it's professional development too. So I'm really grateful for that.
That's what I'm going to say the next time I come home with like a stack of library books. My
It's
family's
for
like,
work.
"What are you
It's
reading?
for
Professional
work."
development." But I don't want to interrupt you. But I think we only have a few minutes left. So shall we turn it to the audience?
Sure.
See if anyone has any questions. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Okay. Sorry, we have one back here, so I'll start back here.
Sorry, excited for your question.
No, sorry. I can only
You'll
see
get a mic.
I can only see
So-
so
so
far with
we
the
want
light, so
everyone.
sorry about that.
Hi. I'm wondering, totally in the dark about the acquisition process, and I'm wondering about how titles go to you rather than someone like Yen Press. Like, I know the manga, the guy she was interested in wasn't a guy at all. That got a lot of traction on Twitter, and then finally they published it through Yen. How would that work?
So we have the opportunity to Kodansha Comics is our client. So a lot of the times they will come to us and they're like, "Hey, we're looking at this series. We're thinking of publishing it. Could you read it and give us your feedback?" However, the editors also have the opportunity to go to Kodansha and also like make our own pitches. I do that a lot just because I really like series and I'm like, this is great. We should jump on this before anyone else. I also like, even though it's slowly decaying, I like say that I live on Twitter. I'm like always on Twitter, kind of seeing what people are talking about, what series are not licensed yet that are really getting a buzz. Really the one caveat for us is because we are like Kodansha US, we can, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, we could really only publish things that Kodansha Japan or Ichijinsha, which is a subsidiary of Kodansha Japan, can publish. So for example, if something is published by Square Enix in Japan, and you're like, "Oh, Kodansha, can you do it?" There may be a slim possibility that we could, because sometimes the in-house team can do that. However, it's kind of less likely. However, if there is a series that is currently being serialized or running in a magazine that's a Kodansha magazine in Japan, there is, more likely that we can do that. So it's a little bit of both. Sometimes it's Kodansha asking us to review titles, but it's also us pitching titles.
Yeah, we can look at those magazines and kind of see what's ahead. And also, what we have, there are Kodansha titles that, for one reason or another, we might not. It doesn't doesn't fit into our plan, or we don't have room for it. So you may see a publisher such as Seven Seas or Yen Press or even Viz or some of the smaller presses publish series that were originally published by Kodansha.
Do we have one?
Sorry. So I'm totally like dating myself here, but would you ever consider like publishing a really older title, like especially like a BL title that hasn't been translated yet into English?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's completely off the table. It's really a matter of like, is there a demand for it? However, I know that Kodansha, we do have like a form where it's like, what are titles do you want to see from us? We're
Is
always
it a Google Doc?
I believe,
somewhere?
I think it's like a Google form. We also have on our website, we have like an email address that you could email us at. Our customer service team is always kind of paying attention to that. So if we see that there is a high demand for a certain title, that definitely influences us in being like, hey, a lot of people are really buzzing about this. Why don't we give it a read and see if we think it would be a good fit for us to publish? So I wouldn't say that it's completely off the table.
Because there's this really old school title called Bronze Zetsoi that came out in like '89. It's not. I don't even know if it was ever finished, but it's one of the original like BL. And I'm just curious why nobody ever translated it and published it in America, since it had such a hardcore following.
Yeah, I mean, it might. Unfortunately, until you get in the weeds of things, like just looking at it from the outside, it's hard to tell. But for example, like some factors that may or may not make a title difficult to license is just, is the author passed away? Do they still have the rights, or does it involve like their estate?
Sometimes it's files.
Yeah, sometimes the files they might not be lettered files, or they may not be in really kind of a high res condition, which means all the Japanese may need to be retouched out. Another element is sometimes the Japanese publisher no longer has those rights, and it'll be another publisher. Like, for example, I think like Kaze Toki no Uta, which is another older BL title. It's kind of ping pong back and forth between publishers in Japan. So who holds the rights may also be another acquisition. But I wouldn't say just because something is older, it means it's an automatic no. It just might mean that it's there might be a little more digging that we have to do to see why that is.
Oh, and speaking of old, all right, this Ashita no Jo is about as old as it gets. And 1969 is legendary. It's not a BL, but I'm just want to give you context about, just because it comes from a long time ago doesn't mean it can't get age. Just like age is a number with people, same thing with works.
Yeah, and that is the first volume. Do we have that out now, or is that coming out soon? The dates
When is it? We got some colleagues who can give us
December. Yes. So just because something's older doesn't mean it's completely off the table. So keep fighting the good fight, and if you want to see something, definitely contact us.
Oh, okay. All right, great. If anybody has any other questions you want to ask on the way out, or meet the panelists on your way out, we want to thank you all so much for coming tonight. Kodansha, thank you for the great tote bags. And to DC Comics, thank you guys for coming. And also to the Stavros Niarchos Library for having us and hosting this wonderful event. We are Penguin Random House. You can follow us on borrowreadrepeat.com and online, and obviously reach out to us with any questions. But we hope you enjoy your swag bags and enjoyed meeting our wonderful talent. We are so happy that you guys all came tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks.